The continued story of Terran, the assistant pigkeeper. I'm glad you've stayed to listen. Now sit round, as Papa Bear reads a story. Chapter 19. The Warlord. Before the startled Terran could draw his blade, a guard seized him and quickly lashed his arms behind his back. The bard, too, was seized. Screaming and kicking, Elenwy fought vainly. For an instant, Gurgi broke loose from his captors and flung himself toward King Morgant, but a warrior struck him brutally to the ground, leaped astride the limp figure, and trussed him tightly.
"Traitor!" Elenwy shrieked. "Liar! You dare to steal!"
"Silence her," Morgant said coldly, and in another moment a gag muffled her cries. Frantically, Terran struggled to reach the girl's side, before he was thrown down and his legs secured with thongs. Morgant watched silently, his features fixed and without expression. The guards stepped away from the helpless companions. Morgant gestured for the warriors to leave the tent. Terran, whose head still spun with confusion and disbelief, strained against his bonds. "You are already a traitor," he cried. "Will you now be a murderer? We are under the protection of Gwydion. You will not escape his wrath."
"I do not fear Gwydion," answered Morgant, "and his protection is worthless to you now, worthless indeed to all Prydain. Even Gwydion is powerless against the Cauldron-born."
Terran stared at him in horror.
"You would not dare to use the Crocan against your own kinsmen, your own people.
This is even more fell than treachery or murder."
"Do you believe so?" Morgant replied. "Then you have more lessons to learn than that of obedience. The cauldron belongs to him who knows how to keep it, and how to use it. It is a weapon ready for a hand. For years Auron was master of the cauldron, yet he lost it.
Is this not proof he was unworthy, that he did not have the strength or cunning to prevent it slipping from his grasp? Ellidyr, the proud fool, believed he could keep it. He is hardly fit to be cast into it. What?" Terran cried. "Will you set yourself to rival Auron?"
"To rival him?"
Morgant asked with a hard smile.
"No, to surpass him. I know my worth, though I have chafed in the service of lesser men than I. Now I see the moment is ripe. There are few," he continued haughtily, "who understand the uses of power, and few who dare to use it when it is offered them."
"Power such as this was offered once to Gwydion," Morgant went on. "He refused it. I shall not fail to take it."
"Shall you?"
"I?" asked Terran, with a terrified glance at Morgant. King Morgant nodded. His eyes were hooded, but his falcon's face was keen and avid.
"Gwydion has spoken of you," he said. "He told me little, but that little is of interest. You are a bold youth, and perhaps more than that. How much more I do not know, but I do know you are without family, without name or future. You can expect nothing, and yet," Morgant added, "you can expect everything."
"I would not offer this to one such as Ellidyr," Morgant continued. "He is too prideful, weakest where he believes himself strong. Do you remember I told you that I know good metal? There is much that is possible with you, Terran of Caerdalban. And this is what I offer. Swear that you shall serve me as your liege lord, and when the time is right, you shall be my war leader, second only to me in all of Prydain."
"Why do you offer me this?"
Terran cried. "Why would you choose me?"
"As I have said,"
Morgant answered.
"there is much you might achieve, if the way is opened for you. Do not deny you have long dreamed of glory. It is not impossible for you to find it, if I judge you well."
"Judge me well," Terran flung back, "and you would know that I scorn to service an evil traitor."
"I have no time to hear you vent your rage," Morgant said. "Many plans must be made between now and dawn. I shall leave you with this to consider. Will you be the first among my warriors, or first among my cauldron-born?"
"Give me to the cauldron, then," Terran shouted. "Cast me into it now, even as I live."
"You have called me traitor," Morgant answered, smiling. "Do not call me fool. I, too, know the secret of the cauldron. Do you think I would have the Crocan shatter even before it began its work?"
"Yes," he went on. "I too have been to the marshes of Morva, long before the cauldron was taken from Maneuven.
for I knew that sooner or later Gwydion must make his move against Auron, and so I prepared myself. Did you pay a price for the Crocan? I, too, paid a price for the knowledge of its workings. I know how to destroy it, and I know how to make it yield a harvest of power. But you were bold, nonetheless, to hope to trick me, Morgant added. You fear me, he said, drawing closer to Terran, and there are many in Prydain who do. Yet you defy me. To dare that, there are few. This is a rare metal indeed, ready to be tempered. Terran was about to speak, but the warlord raised his hand. Say no more. Instead, think carefully. If you refuse, you shall become a voiceless, mindless slave, without even hope of death to release you from your bondage. Terran's heart sank, but he raised his head proudly. If that is the destiny laid on me, it will be a harder destiny than you believe, Morgan said, his eyes flickering. A warrior does not fear to give up his own life, but will he sacrifice that of his comrades? Terran gasped in horror as Morgant went on. Yes, said the warlord. One by one your companions shall be slain and given to the Crocan. Who will it devour before you cry a halt? Will it be the bard or the shabby creature that serves you? Or perhaps the young princess? They shall go before you, even as you watch, and at the last, yourself. Weigh this carefully, said the warlord. I shall return for your answer. He flung his black cloak about his shoulders and strode from the tent. Terran struggled against his bonds, but they held firm. He sank back and bowed his head. The bard, who had been silent this while, heaved a powerful sigh. In the marshes of Morva, he said. If I had only known, I should have asked Ordu to change me into a toad. At the time, I didn't care for the idea. As I think of it now, it's a happier life than being a cauldron warrior. At least there would have been dew circles to dance in. He will not succeed in this, Terran said. Somehow, we must find a way to escape. We dare not lose hope. I agree absolutely, Fluter answered. Your general idea is excellent. It's only the details that are lacking. Lose hope? By no means. A flam is always hopeful. I intend to go on hoping, he added ruefully, even when they come and pop me into the Crocan. Gurgi and Elidir still lay unconscious, but Elenwy had not ceased working furiously at the gag, and now at last she succeeded in forcing it out of her mouth. Morgant! She gasped. He'll pay for this. Why, I thought I'd stifle. He might have kept me from talking, but he didn't keep me from listening. When he comes back, I hope he tries to put me in the cauldron first. He'll soon find out what he's dealing with. He'll wish he'd never thought of making his own cauldron born. Terran shook his head. By then it will be too late. We shall be slain before we are taken to the Crocan. No, there is only one hope. None of you shall be sacrificed because of me. I have decided what I must do. Decided? Elenwy burst out. The only thing you have to decide on is how we shall escape from this tent. If you're thinking of anything else, you're wasting your time. That's like wondering whether to scratch your head when a boulder's about to fall on it. This is my decision, Terran said slowly. I will accept what Morgant offers. What? Elenwy exclaimed in disbelief. For a while I thought you'd actually learned something from Adon's brooch. How can you think to accept? I shall swear my allegiance to Morgant, Terran went on. He shall have my word, but shall not make me keep it. An oath given under threat of death cannot bind me. This way, at least, we may gain a little time. Are you sure Morgant's warriors didn't strike you on the head and you just didn't notice? Elenwy asked sharply. Do you imagine Morgant won't guess what you plan? He has no intention of keeping his part of the bargain. He'll slay us all anyway. Once you're in his clutches, I mean more than you are, you won't get out of them. Morgant might have been one of the greatest war leaders in Prydain, but he's turned evil. And if you try coming to terms with him, well, you'll find it's worse than being a cauldron warrior. Though I admit, that isn't very attractive either. Terran was silent for a while. I fear you are right, he said, but I don't know what else we can do. Well, get out first, Elenwy advised. We can decide what else when the time comes. Somehow it's hard to think about where to run as long as your hands and feet are tied up. With much difficulty, the tightly bound companions struggled closer and sought to undo each other's thongs. The knots refused to yield, slipped from their numb fingers, and only bit more deeply into their flesh. Again and again, the companions returned to their labors until they lay breathless and exhausted.
Even Ellenby no longer had the strength to speak. They rested for a while, hoping to gain new energy, but the night moved as a heavy, tormented dream, and the moments they passed in fitful drowsing did nothing to restore them, nor did they dare lose too much precious time.
Morning, Terran knew, would come swiftly.
The cold, gray trickle of dawn had already begun to seep into the tent. All night, as they had toiled, Terran had heard the movements of warriors in the clearing, the voice of Morgant crying harsh, urgent commands. Now he dragged himself painfully to the curtain at the entrance of the tent, pressed his cheek against the cold ground, and tried to peer out. He could see little, for the rising mists swirled above the turf, and he made out only shadow shapes, hastening back and forth. The warriors, he imagined, were gathering their gear, perhaps making ready to strike camp. A long, pitiful whinny came from the line of tethered horses, and he recognized it as that of Islamok. The Crocan still squatted where it had been. Terran made out the dark, brooding mass, and it seemed to him, in a flare of horror, that its mouth gaped greedily. Terran rolled over and pulled himself back to the companions. The bard's features were pale. He appeared half dazed by fatigue and suffering. Ellenby raised her head and looked silently at him. "What?" murmured Fluter. "Has the moment already come for us to say farewell?" "Not yet," Terran said, "though Morgant will be here soon enough, I fear. Then our time will be upon us. How does Gurgey fare?" "The poor thing is still unconscious," Ellenby answered. "Leave him as he is. It is kinder thus." Ellidyr stirred and groaned feebly. Slowly his eyes opened. He winced, turned his blood-stained, broken face to Terran, and studied him for a time as though without recognition. Then his torn lips moved in his familiar, bitter grimace. "And so we are together again, Terran of Caerdalban. I did not expect us to meet so soon," he said. "Have no fear, son of Panlacur," Terran answered. "It shall not be for long." Ellidyr bowed his head. "For that I am truly sorry. I would make up all the ill I have done all of you." "Would you have said the same if the cauldron were still in your hands?" Terran asked quietly. Ellidyr hesitated. "I shall speak the truth. I do not know. The black beast you saw is a harsh master. Its claws are sharp, yet I did not feel them until now. But I tell you this," Ellidyr continued, trying to lift himself. "I stole the cauldron out of pride, not evil. I swear to you, on whatever honor remains to me, I would not have used it. Yes, I would have taken your glory for my own, but I, too, would have borne the Crocan to Gwydion and offered it for destruction. Believe this much of me." Terran nodded. "I believe you, Prince of Penlacur, and now, perhaps even more than you believe it yourself." A wind had risen, moaning through the trees and shaking the tent. The curtain blew back. Terran saw the warriors forming in ranks behind the cauldron. Chapter 20. The Final Price. "Ellidyr!" Terran cried. "Have you strength enough to break your bonds and free the rest of us?" Ellidyr rolled on his side and strained desperately against the tight cords. The bard and Terran tried to aid him, but at last Ellidyr fell back, exhausted and gasping with the pain of his efforts. "Too much of my strength is gone," he murmured. "I fear Morgant has given me my death wound. I can do no more." The curtain blew open again. An instant later, Terran was flung full length and roughly spun around. He kicked wildly with his bound legs and tried to right himself. "Stop struggling, you clot!" a voice shouted in his ear. "Dolly!" Terran's heart leapt. "Is it you?" "Clever question," snapped that voice. "Stop trying to fight me. Things are hard enough without you squirming. Whoever tied these knots, I wish he had them about his neck." Terran felt firm hands drawing at the thongs. "Dolly, how did you come here?" "Don't bother me with silly chatter," growled the dwarf. Terran felt a knee jabbing into the small of his back, as Dolly took a better grip on the bonds. "Can't you see I'm busy?" muttered the dwarf. "No, of course you can't, but that doesn't matter. Drat, if I hadn't lost my axe, I'd be through this in no time. Oh, my ears, I've never stayed invisible so long at once. Hornets! Wasps!" Suddenly the thongs parted. Terran sat up and began as best he could to unbind his legs. In another moment Dolly himself flashed into sight and set about freeing the bard. The stout dwarf was grimy, muddy, and his ears were tinged bright blue. Dolly stopped his exertions to clap his hands to his head. Enough invisibility is enough, he cried. No need for it here. Not yet. Bumblebees, a whole hive of them in my ears. However did you find us? Cried Ellen as the dwarf ripped away her bonds. If you must know, the dwarf snapped impatiently, I didn't find you, not at first. I found Ellidyr. Saw him come up from the river a little before Morgant reached him. I was on my way to Caircadorn, after I shook off the huntsman, to get help from Gwydion. I didn't dare wasting time chasing through the marshes of Morva after you. Ellidyr had the cauldron, and your horses too. That got my suspicions up, so I went invisible and followed him on foot. As soon as I understood what had happened, I turned back to look for you. My pony had run off. Dreaded beast, we never liked each other. And you got here ahead of me. The dwarf knelt and untied Gurgi, who had begun to show some signs of life, but hesitated when he came to Ellidyr. What about this one? Dolly asked. I have an idea he's better off as he is. Yeah, he added gruffly. I know what he tried to do. Ellidyr raised his head. Taran met his glance and gestured quickly to Dolly. Free him, Taran ordered. Dolly paused, doubtful. Taran repeated his words. The dwarf shook his head, then shrugged. If you say so, he muttered, setting to work on Elidyr's bonds. While Elenwy chafed Gurgi's wrists, the bard hurried to the tent flap and cautiously peered out. Taran searched vainly for weapons. I can see Morgant, Fluter called. He's on his way here. Well, he shall have a surprise. We are unarmed, Taran cried. They far outnumber us and can slay us at their pleasure. Rip up the back of the tent, Dolly exclaimed. Make a run for it through the forest. And leave the Crocan in Morgant's hands, replied Taran. No, that we dare not do. Ellidyr had risen to his feet. I had not enough strength to break my own bonds, he said, but I can still serve you. Before Taran could stop him, Ellidyr plunged from the tent. The guards shouted the alarm. Taran saw Morgant fall back in astonishment, then draw his sword. Slay him, Morgant commanded. Slay him! Keep him from the cauldron! With the bard and Dolly at his heels, Taran raced from the tent and flung himself against King Morgant, fighting furiously to wrest the sword from the warlord's hands. With a savage snarl, Morgant caught him by the throat and tossed him to the ground, then turned to pursue Ellidyr. The horsemen had broken ranks and hastened to close upon the running figure. Taran scrambled to his feet. Ahead he saw Ellidyr grappling fiercely with one of the warriors. Fighting as he had never fought before, the Prince of Penlacur, Taran knew, was calling on all the strength remaining to him. Ellidyr threw the warrior down, but faltered and cried out as the man's sword thrust deep into his side. Clutching the wound, Ellidyr stumbled ahead. No, no! Taran shouted. Ellidyr, save yourself! A few paces from the cauldron, struggling madly, Ellidyr broke free of the warriors. Then, with a cry, he flung himself into the Crocan's gaping mouth. The Crocan shuddered like a living thing. In horror and dismay, Taran cried out again to Ellidyr. He fought his way toward the cauldron, but in another instant a sharp clap, louder than thunder, rang above the clearing. The leafless trees trembled to their roots, the branches writhed as if in agony. Then, while echoes ripped the air and a whirlwind screamed overhead, the cauldron split and shattered. The jagged shards fell away from the lifeless form of Ellidyr. A war horse burst from the thicket. Astride it rode King Smoit, a naked sword in his fist, a shout of battle on his lips. Behind the red-bearded king streamed mounted warriors, who plunged against the men of Morgant. In the press of combat, Taran glimpsed a white steed galloping to the charge. Gwydion! Taran shouted and struggled to his side. He caught sight of Coll then. The stout old warrior had drawn his sword and struck mightily about him. Gwistel, with Caw clinging to his shoulder, dashed into the fray. Bellowing with rage, King Smoit drove straight for Morgant. He raised his sword and lashed viciously at the rearing steed. Smoit leaped to the ground. Two of Morgant's warriors threw themselves in front of him to defend their lord, but Smoit cut them down with powerful blows and strode past them. Eyes unhooded and blazing, his teeth bared, Morgant fought savagely amid the shattered pieces of the cauldron, as though he sought defiantly to claim them. His sword had broken under the force of Smoite's attack, yet he slashed and thrust again and again with the jagged blade. The grimace of hatred and arrogance frozen upon his features, his hand still clutching the blood-stained weapon, even as he fell. Morgant's riders had been slain or captured as Gwydion's voice rose in command to cease the combat. Terran stumbled to Elidyr's side and tried to raise him. He bowed his head in grief. "The black beast is gone from you, Prince of Penlacour," he murmured. A high-pitched whinny behind him made Terran turn. It was Islamok, who had broken her tether and now stood over the body of her master. The rowan lifted her lean, bony head, tossed her mane, spun about, and galloped from the clearing. Terran, understanding the frenzied look in the rowan's eyes, cried out and ran after her. Islamok plunged through the undergrowth. Terran strove to overtake her and seize the hanging bridle, but the rowan sped onward to the ravine. She did not check her speed, even at the brink. Islamok made a mighty leap, hung poised in the air for a moment, then plummeted to the rocks below. Terran covered his face with his hands and turned away. In the clearing, the bodies of King Morgant and Elidir lay side by side, and the remainder of King Smoite's horsemen rode in a slow, mournful circle around them. Alone and apart, Gwydion leaned heavily on his black sword, Dyrnwyn, his shaggy head bent, his weathered face filled with sorrow. Terran drew near and stood silently. At length Gwydion spoke. "Fflewddur has told me all that befell you. My heart is grieved that Kull and I found you only now. Yet without King Smoit and his warriors I fear we might not have prevailed. He grew impatient and came seeking us. Had I been able to send him word, I would have summoned him long before this. I am grateful to him for his impatience. And to you, assistant pig-keeper," he added. "The Crocan is destroyed, and with it Auron's power to add to the number of his cauldron-born. It is one of the gravest defeats Auron has ever suffered, but I know the price you paid." "It was Elidir who paid the final price," Terran said slowly. "The last honor belongs to him." He spoke then of Islamok. "He has lost all else, even his steed." "Or perhaps he has gained all," Gwydion answered, "and his honor shall be certain. We shall raise a barrow to his memory. Islamok, too, shall rest with him, for they are both now at peace. Smoite's dead shall also sleep in honor, and a barrow be raised above Morgant, king of Medoc." "Morgant?" Terran asked, turning a puzzled glance to Gwydion. "How can there be honor for such a man?" "It is easy to judge evil unmixed," replied Gwydion. "But alas, in most of us good and bad are closely woven as the threads on a loom. Greater wisdom than mine is needed for the judging." "King Morgant served the Sons of Dawn long and well," he went on, "until the thirst for power parched his throat. He was a fearless and noble lord. In battle he saved my life more than once. These things are part of him, and cannot be put aside or forgotten." "And so shall I honor Morgant," Gwydion said, "for what he used to be, and Elidir, Prince of Penlacour, for what he became." Near the tents of Morgant, Terran found the companions again. Under Elenwe's care, Kirche had recovered from the guard's blow, and looked only a little shaken. "Poor tender head is filled with breakings and achings," Kirche said with a wan smile at Terran. "He is sad not to fight at side of kindly master. He would have struck down wicked warriors. Oh yes!" "There's been more than enough fighting," Elenwe said. "I found your sword again," she added, handing the weapon to Terran. "But sometimes I wish Dolben hadn't given it to you in the first place. It's bound to lead to trouble." "Oh, I should think our troubles are over," put in Fflewddur, cradling his injured arm. "The beastly old kettle is smashed to bits, thanks to Elidir. Thanks to Elidir," he went on sadly. "The bards shall sing of our deeds, and of his."
"I don't care about that,"
grumbled Dolly, rubbing his ears, which had only now begun to return to their natural color.
"I just don't want anyone, not even Gwydion, dreaming up another scheme to have me turn invisible."
"Good old Dolly," Terran said. The more you grumble, the more pleased you are with yourself.
Good old Dolly,
replied the dwarf.
Humph.
Taran caught sight of Coll and King Smoit resting beneath an oak. Coll had taken off his close-fitting helm, and, though bruised and slashed, his face beamed and his bald head glowed with pleasure. As he put an arm around Taran's shoulders, "We did not meet as soon as I expected," Coll said with a wink, "for I hear you were busy with other things."
My body and blood,
roared Smoit, giving Taran a clap on the back.
you looked like a skinned rabbit last time I saw you. Now the rabbit has gone, and only the skin and bones are left.
A loud squawk interrupted the red-bearded king. In surprise, Taran turned and saw Gwistel sitting alone and morose. On his shoulder, Kaw hopped up and down and bobbed his head in delight. "So it's you again," Gwistel remarked, sighing heavily as Taran hurried over. "Well, you shan't blame me for what happened. I warned you. However, what's done is done, and there's no sense complaining. No use in it at all." "You shall not deceive me again, Gwistel of the Fair Folk," Taran said. "I know who you are, and the valiant service you have rendered." Kaa croaked joyfully as Taran smoothed his feathers and scratched him under the beak. "Go on," Gwistel said. "Put him on your shoulder, that's what he wants. For the matter of that, you shall have him as a gift, with the thanks of the fair folk. For you have done us a service too. We were uneasy with the Crocan knocking about here and there. One never knew what would happen. Yes, yes, pick him up, take him," Gwistel added with a melancholy sigh. "He's taken quite a fancy to you. It's just as well. I'm simply not up to keeping crows any more. Not up to it at all."
Taran,
croaked Kaa. "Though I warn you again," Gwistel went on, "pay no attention to him. Most of the time he just talks just to hear himself talk. Like some others I could mention. The secret is, don't listen. No use in it. No use whatever." After they had raised the barrows, Gwistel left to resume his guard at the waypost. The companions, King Smoit and his riders, departed from the clearing and turned their horses toward the river Avron. High overhead, their wings darkening the sky, flight after flight of Gwythanes retreated toward Annuvin. Of the huntsmen there was no sign, and Gwydion believed that Auron, learning of the Crocans' destruction, had summoned them to return. The companions rode not in triumphant joy, but slowly and thoughtfully. The heart of King Smoit, too, was heavy, for he had suffered the loss of many warriors. With Kaw perched on his shoulder, Taran rode beside Gwydion at the head of the column as it wound through hills rich with autumn's colors. For a while, for a long while, Taran did not speak. "It is strange," he said at last. "I had longed to enter the world of men. Now I see it filled with sorrow, with cruelty and treachery, with those who would destroy all around them." "Yet enter it you must," Gwydion answered, "for it is a destiny laid on each of us. True, you have seen these things, but there are equal parts of love and joy. Think of Adon, and believe this. Think, too, of your companions. Out of friendship for you, they would have given up all they valued, indeed, all they possessed." Taran nodded. "I see now the price I paid was the least of all, for the brooch was never truly mine. I wore it, but it was no part of me. I am thankful I kept it as long as I did. At least I knew, for a little while, how a bard must feel, and what it must be like to be a hero." "That is why your sacrifice was all the more difficult," Gwydion said. "You chose to be a hero, not through enchantment, but through your own manhood, and since you have chosen, for good or ill, you must take the risks of a man. You may win or you may lose. Time will decide." They had come into the valley of Ystrad, and here Gwydion reined up the golden-maned steed. "Melangar and I must now return to Caerdathel," he said, "and bring word to King Math. You shall tell Dulban all that has happened. Indeed, this time you know more of these events than I." "Go swiftly," Gwydion said, reaching out his hand. "Your comrades wait for you, and Coll, I know, is eager to ready his vegetable garden for winter. Farewell, Taran, assistant pigkeeper, and friend." Gwydion waved once and rode northward. Taran watched until he was out of sight. He turned Melonlas then, and saw the faces of the companions smiling at him. Hurry along, Ellenby called. Hen Wen will be wanting her bath, and I'm afraid Gurgie and I left in such a hurry I didn't take time to straighten up the scullery. That's much worse than starting a journey and forgetting to put on your shoes. Taryn galloped towards them. This concludes The Black Cauldron by Lloyd Alexander. Thank you for listening, and remember, have a good day. You deserve it.